Alright guys, in this video I'm going to be showing you guys the vent, everything about the vent. This takes a while to grasp. It took me a lot of reading, a lot of YouTube videos, but eventually it made sense, and I think I can honestly do a pretty good job explaining it if you just give me your undivided attention. So for the sake of this, I'm just gonna pick arbitrary numbers. Let's just go with 70, height, 170, and we'll just go with male, okay? So remember, you have first and foremost your manual and your auto modes, okay? I have the circuit hooked up to this bag here so you can see an example of what it would look like. This is the patient, this is you. You can technically breathe for the patient the entire case, okay? Warning, the CO2 is gonna keep alarming because I have it unplugged, but it should pick up here, so you see how it's picking up my end tidal. So again, this is just a little trick. If the patient isn't giving you a CO2 reading before the case starts, you can always unhook this and blow into it through your mask, just to see that it's working. It's not, some attendings might get pissed, but whatever. Anyway, so here we are. This is the APL valve is completely, it's on 0 right now. So that means if I give it a squeeze, there's not going to be any pressure that builds up. What this means is that if this is on this setting, the patient is not breathing against anything, okay? So right now, if the patient wants to breathe, it's easy for them. You see how the patient's breathing? And this here on my side is picking up the patient's breathing pattern, okay? That's what it should look like. Here as well. Volumes are being delivered, flow, pressure as well. Now if this is popped all the way open here, the patient's gonna have to breathe against 80 centimeters of H2O, which is a lot of pressure here. Look how much harder it is for me to squeeze the bag. I can't deliver that breath because all the pressure is gonna build up on my side here. So if I need to deliver a very strong breath for like a laryngospasm, I can squeeze a lot of pressure very hard. But look, this is what happens on the patient's side. So just be mindful of that. You don't want the patient to be breathing against that if you want to see if they're breathing on their own on manual mode, okay? Again, with this completely on 0, your bag is giving you an idea of what the patient is doing. So if you ever flip, if you are getting high pressures for some reason, which I'll get to later, and you're like, I want to know what the patient's lungs are like, you can listen to the lungs, but also flip this to 0 and see what the bag feels like. Because remember, this is a closed circuit. So here, patient's lungs are nice and soft. But if you ever flip to manual mode, and look how I'm giving it a big squeeze here, the bag is tight. That's a bad sign. That means with the combination of high peak pressures, the patient might be having a bronchospasm. Again, if you want to give the patient some breaths, say around 20, and I'll just breathe for the patient myself, okay? Which will do the trick. Typically, you'd want to see end tidal, so I'll breathe into this. Okay, now that's on the floor. That's disgusting, so I won't be using that anymore. Okay, so now instead of breathing for the patient the entire case, we'll have the machine do its trick for us. So first mode that it defaults to is PRVC, okay? With this mode, these 3 modes here mean the patient should not be breathing on their own, okay? The machine is gonna deliver a set volume or pressure to breathe for the patient. So this mode is intended for patients who are either paralyzed, supposed to be paralyzed, and should not be breathing on their own, okay? And if the patient does breathe on their own, I'll show you what that looks like and how you can adjust the vent to allow them to breathe. Because if the patient is allowed to breathe, meaning surgery doesn't need them paralyzed, surgery doesn't care, then let them breathe on their own, it's fine, okay? You can always help them out. On this first mode here, PRVC, there's a few settings. PEEP, this is your positive end expiratory pressure. This is the amount of air being delivered at the end of expiration to keep your alveoli open, so that way they can participate in gas exchange. 5 is like the default setting, which is a minimal amount of pressure. But if you turn it to 0, you'd see that the bag has a different appearance, okay? So giving it a PEEP of, let's say, 20, that's going to deliver a lot of pressure, and it's going to make your peak pressures rise as well, okay? So typically 5, if your patient's more obese, you can go up to about, I'd say, 10. Respiratory rate, pretty obvious here. If I want to increase my rate, I'll go to a rate of 45. You see that? It's breathing for the patient, 45 times per minute. I can also adjust the tidal volume, okay? This is the amount of volume I want delivered to the patient. Now, I'm just going to crank this down so it doesn't alarm at me. But tidal volume is set to be automatically 8 mLs per kilogram. Now, the literature says 6 to 8 milliliters per kilogram of predicted body weight, see, PBW, is ideal for patients on the ventilator. Too much can cause barotrauma, not enough means the patient's not getting the proper air to have sufficient minute ventilation. Okay, and remember your minute ventilation is your respiratory rate times your tidal volume. So I can turn my tidal volume down, and it will show me here on this little window what this comes out to in terms of liters per kilogram, because I entered in the patient settings in the beginning. Okay, so I'm just gonna increase this here because I said the patient was 70 kilos, so 70 times 8, we'll go here. This is 8 mLs per kilogram, which is good, okay? Other things here, trigger pressure, this is the, makes it either easier or harder for the patient to breathe. I won't get into this too much in this video, I'll talk about it later, but basically if you increase your trigger flow like this, it makes it more difficult for the patient to trigger a breath. If I turn it the other way, very easy for the patient to trigger. And sometimes the machines are backwards, okay, so just be mindful of that. Your I to E ratio, this is the ratio between your inspiration and expiration, okay? So because this is breathing for the patient on it automatically, you can tell the machine how much time you want to give the patient for inspiration and expiration, okay? So typically 1 to 2 is normal, so more time is spent in expiration rather than inspiration. But if the patient's bronchospasming, and you should know this from my PDF, from my, we'll call it book, if the patient's bronchospasming and their end tidal CO2 is kind of sloping like a shark fin, that means they're struggling with expiring at the very end. So what you can do is increase the ratio to give them more time to expire, okay? And you can ignore that for now. So again, very easy. This setting, all you're doing is setting a volume, setting a rate, and setting a PEEP, okay? That's it. If your end tidal is high, you can adjust your volume, you can adjust your rate as well. And that's pretty much it. There's also different things here. You can look at your loops here to see what it looks like. Again, I talk about this in my book. If the patient has secretions, you'll see this in your flow volume loop, that at the very end here, it'll look like a zigzag. Manometer, this is telling you how much pressure is being generated, which is reflective here by your peak pressures, okay? You should always be mindful of this number. So I talked about this side, now I'm gonna talk about this side. So your peak pressure is the amount of pressure that's being generated inside the patient's lungs. So the patient's lungs are tight, and I give it a squeeze, you'll see that the peak pressure is going up. So here I'm holding the patient's, I'm trying to simulate a higher pressure. And you should see that it should increase in the value. Okay, so that should be alarming to you. Your minute ventilation is simply just a calculation, which I already talked about. Your respiratory rate, this is the patient's respiratory rate. This is what the patient is doing, okay? So because I just gave a few squeezes, this number is not gonna match this number, but once it settles out, this should change to be 14, which it's already fixing itself right now. Now you'll see, again, just to make things clear, this is what the patient is doing. You set your tidal volume, this is what the patient's giving you back, okay? Respiratory rate, this is what the patient is doing, okay? Despite what you set. So if I set a rate on this setting of 5, this means the patient is going to breathe 5 times per minute. All right? Now here's where things get interesting. Let's say your paralysis starts to wear off. Now, let's say, again, sorry if the audio sounds like it's being chopped off because I'm pausing the video in between. But let's say your paralysis wears off or the patient's not deep enough and they start breathing on their own, okay? This is what you would see. This pink inverted slope, meaning the patient is now triggering a breath. Now when you see that, again, depends on the circumstances. You either have to deepen your patient and add more paralytic, or it means it's time to let them start breathing on their own, okay? So now we're gonna go to a different setting. Actually, let's say, for example, let's just say make believe, okay, the patient's triggering a breath, surgery's like, hey, the patient's moving. I give more paralytic, I deepen them a little bit, or let's just say they coughed. Okay, you treat that issue. Again, based on this setting, this is not intended for the patient to breathe. It's gonna kick back into the settings that we set. So now the patient's gonna fall back down to 5 breaths per minute because of the paralytic and the anesthesia. They're not gonna be able to breathe on their own. So it's gonna fall back into these settings, okay? And now you'll see here, the tidal volumes are matching up, the respiratory rate is matching up, okay? Now we're gonna go to a mode that allows the patient to breathe. So again, here, you're chilling on the vent, watching TikTok or whatever, boom, patient starts triggering, okay? Oh, this is a OMFS case, it's a LaFour, they don't care if the patient's paralyzed, let's let them breathe a little bit, okay? Boom, let's just go here, pressure support. These are the settings that come up, okay? PEEP, we already talked about. Backup rate, okay? So again, in this setting here, this is saying we're gonna let the patient breathe. But if the patient stops breathing on their own, the vent is gonna automatically give them 4 breaths per minute, okay? I'm gonna change this to 7, okay? So that means the patient's breathing on their own at 10 a minute. This does not apply to them. Same with pressure control. Pressure control and pressure support are the same exact thing. This is just telling you the amount of pressure the vent is going to deliver to help the patient breathe. So for example, If the patient's breathing on their own, a 70 kilogram person should have 560 of a tidal volume. Let's say they're breathing 200. That's not sufficient for them. They need a little bit of support, but they're still breathing on their own. You're going to give them a pressure of 9 centimeters of water over what they're already doing. That's how I like to think about it. It's just a little boost, okay? Pressure control, this means if the patient stops breathing, this is the amount of pressure that's going to be delivered to help the patient breathe, okay? So I hope that's not too confusing. This is when the patient's breathing, pressure support. This is the backup rate. So, for example, here we go. On this setting, we're going to put a pressure support of 5. And right now, like, the patient's not breathing because I'm not doing anything to the bag, which is simulating the patient. So look how it's kicking into a backup rate of 7. You'll see this start to line up. The machine is going to make the patient breathe. Essentially, this is mimicking PRVC because it's breathing for the patient and is delivering a set tidal volume, but this is based off of pressure, okay? The only difference is that on PRVC here, you can adjust the I to E ratio and you're setting a tidal volume, okay? You can also adjust the trigger pressures. We're gonna ignore that. So now, just for continuity, we're on PRVC, hit accept, patient's triggering, it's okay, we're gonna let them breathe, boom. Pressure support, I always make this like 7 just because 4 is kind of low. We're gonna give them some pressure support, just say like 10, okay. So now, patients breathing on their own. 13 to 14 times a minute. Well, I'm going too fast. Whatever that number is. Okay? So first thing you should do is look and see how much tidal volume are they generating. Okay? That's a lot. That means the pressure support that we're giving the patient is too high. So I need to decrease this. Okay? Let's go down to 5. Okay? Now that looks better. The patient's breathing, and the pressure support that we're giving them is helping. And they need it, okay? Now let's say you still at a pressure support of 5, and the patient's just going super crazy tidal volumes, right? If it's allowed, meaning, again, the patient doesn't need to be paralyzed, just put them on manual mode and make sure this is closed off. And now let's just see what the patient does, okay? So look at that, the patient's pulling good volumes. They have a respiratory rate that's decent. So one thing to think about though is with this setting, you can't get lazy, although you should never be lazy. But you need to watch the vent because if the patient stops breathing, there's nothing there to save them. Because look what's going to happen. If the patient stops breathing, there's no backup rate to help them, and there's no pressure support or pressure control to help. So that's why pressure support is nice. I go to pressure support, I like my settings, boom. We're on pressure support now. Patient's breathing on their own, okay? Little breaths here. We're happy. Their peak pressures look good. Tidal volumes look good. Rate looks good. But let's just say our medication is catching up to the patient, right? You just gave some Dilaudid. You just bolus propofol on accident. So now look. Patient's not breathing, but the machine is going to help them out, okay? It's going to kick them into a rate of 7, and it's going to give them pressure of 10 above their PEEP. Now, are we happy with those numbers for someone who's 70 kilos? No. So I need to give them more support. And now let's see what it looks like now. Okay, a little better. Just go 18. The reason I'm going back and forth, and I hope you watch this entire video multiple times, is because you're gonna see this all the time and you're gonna get confused about what to do next. You're gonna be like, okay, what do I do with my pressure control? What do I do with my pressure support? I don't wanna call my attending because I feel like I should know this. It's just a game. 1, is the patient allowed to be breathing? 2, what settings can I use to help them breathe if they're allowed to breathe? 3, do I need to stop them like breathing? This number is just a magic number to think about, to get a volume that makes sense. Now, if you're in this situation where, and again, I'm sorry for rambling, but you wanted the patient to breathe, you set them to a pressure support, they stop breathing, it kicks them into this rate, and it's been like 5 minutes, just put them back on this mode, PRVC. You don't have to, it's still, this setting is fine, it's still doing the job, but it's better because you can just set a direct volume, you can adjust the I to E, you can trigger point, all that stuff. It's just a better setting to let the patient, to let the vent breathe for the patient fully. So, patient's breathing again, boom, we're going to pressure support, great. Now, these last modes here, SIMV, synchronized, intermittent, mandatory ventilation. There's 2 types, there's a pressure control and a volume control. They're essentially the same thing. One of them looks just like PRVC. You see here, rate, volume, PEEP, and then there's just a pressure support above PEEP, so very similar. But in this mode here, it's essentially just pressure support with a little extra spiciness. So I'm not doing anything, it's breathing for the patient at a rate of 5 times a minute at a set volume of 270, okay? Let's just crank it up a little bit because this patient's 70 kilos, so I'm gonna go 500 something, whatever, okay? What this means is if the patient starts breathing on their own, the machine is going to give them a pressure support of 18 when they breathe, okay? Because that's what it's set at. So I'm here, I'm gonna give the bag a squeeze on the patient side, boom. And look how much of a volume that was, that's a lot. Okay? Way too high of support. So I'm gonna go down on my support a little bit, just like I would on pressure support mode, standard pressure support mode. The pressure support in SIMV and the pressure support in the pressure support mode are the same exact thing. Pressure support is just the amount of pressure you're giving the patient on top of their PEEP to give them a little boost to pull good tidal volumes, okay? So we're on SIMV. The patient's breathing. Treat it just like you would anything else. And if the patient stops breathing here, what's going to happen? The machine is going to kick them into a rate of 5 liters per minute and give them a tidal volume of 540. So some attendings hate SIMV, some people love it. Personally, I don't mind it. I think it's cool that I can see the exact tidal volume I'm setting for the patient, which is nice, rather than playing a guessing game with pressure support. Because on pressure support, again, when the patient stops breathing, this PS is going to switch to PC. Ready? Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. We're being patient. Don't skip the video. Boom. It switched because the patient's clearly not breathing So they have a backup rate of 4 and a pressure control of 10. And this is the tidal volumes that they're pulling. Let's just make this a little faster so I can see it better. Easier. Now I'm just like, okay, what does a pressure control of 10 give me? It gives me 270s. I need to go up a little bit. Okay, let's see what it is now. 420s. So do you see the difference? With SIMV, I'm actually putting in a set number that I like. Now with here, ready? I'm going to give the patient a breath. I'm not joking. Ready? 1, 2, 3, boom. Look how it switched to pressure support. This is giving them support with their breath. I'm going to keep reiterating this to you until it makes 100% sense to you, because I promise you, everyone gets into the OR, you're on your own, your first week, and you're like, what the heck do these things mean? I don't understand. What's the difference between PC and PS? It's very simple, okay? Now, this SIMV mode, rather than setting a volume, it's going to set a pressure. So here's just a pressure control above PEEP, okay? This is just telling you, here you're controlling the pressure in this setting versus the other setting, you're controlling the volume. Personally, I like volume better, but there are certain circumstances where the patient's obese and they're flipped in reverse T and all of their fat is just laying on top of their lungs and they can't breathe. It's nicer to be able to adjust their I to E ratio. It's nicer to be able to manage directly the pressure, you're manipulating the pressure, than volume. So that's about it. These first two modes, pressure control and volume control, also similar situations. PRVC is like the number one easiest to play with. These two, like very similar. You set a volume, you set a rate, nothing else. Pressure control, you're setting a pressure, you set a rate, you set a PEEP. It's the only difference, okay? If you want to focus more on your volumes, then you go with a volume setting. If you want to focus more on the pressures, do a pressure, okay? Now, if a patient is obese, because I just mentioned this, and they're reverse T, what do you think you should do to the I to E ratio? Most people would think, oh, I want to increase it, I want to give them more time to expire, right? Like a bronchospasm, but that's wrong. Their inspiration's being restricted by all of that extrinsic fat that's laying on their lungs, so they feel like something's weighing on their chest, they can't breathe. Help, help. They need more time with their inspiration, okay? So in that situation, all you're gonna do is make the ratio smaller. Give them more time to inspire, okay? And I think that's it for this video. I hope you liked it. Let me know what you guys think.